She entered the Alpha King's castle as a servant. His wolf instantly called her his true queen. Lira Ashworth had not used her real name in 3 years. On the day she walked through the tall iron gates of Blackthorn Castle, she carried a borrowed name, a plain gray dress, and a small bag with nothing valuable inside it. The guards did not look at her twice. That was exactly what she wanted. 3 years ago, her parents had been executed for a crime they never committed. The pack elders had called it treason. Lira called it a lie, but no one asked a 15-year-old girl what she thought. She had run that same night, changed her name by morning, and spent every year since trying to become invisible. Invisible people did not get killed. Invisible people survived. Now she was 18, and she had a new job as a servant in the castle of the most powerful Alpha King in the Northern Territories. King Draven Ashgrove ruled Blackthorn with a calm, quiet strength that made even his own generals lower their voices around him. People said his wolf, Kale, had not shown real emotion in years. They said the king had built a wall around himself after losing his parents in a pack war, and no one, wolf or human, had ever gotten past it. Lira did not care about any of that. She only cared about 3 meals a day, a small room to sleep in, and a place where nobody asked about her past. Her first morning of work went smoothly. She swept floors, folded linens, and stayed away from the main hallways where important people walked. By afternoon, she felt almost proud of herself. She had gone an entire day without being noticed. Then, carrying a tall stack of folded sheets down the east corridor, she turned a corner too quickly and walked straight into someone very tall, very solid, and very much not a wall. The sheets went flying. Lira landed hard on the floor, a pillowcase draped over her face like a strange white flag of surrender. She groaned and pulled the fabric away, ready to apologize to whichever noble she had just knocked over. She froze. It was the king. King Draven Ashgrove stood above her, dark eyes wide with surprise, one hand already reaching down to help her up. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then something changed in his eyes. They flickered, just for a second, from deep brown to a bright, glowing gold. Lira had grown up around wolves her whole life. She knew what that gold flash meant. It was not anger. It was not a warning. It was recognition. Deep, instinctive, undeniable recognition. Inside him, Kale the wolf let out a low sound, somewhere between a growl and a sigh of relief, as if he had been searching for something for a very long time and had just found it lying on the floor in a pile of bedsheets. "Mate," the wolf said, clear as a bell inside Draven's mind. Draven did not say the word out loud. Kings did not announce something like that to a hallway full of witnesses, especially not about a servant girl he had just knocked over. But his hand stayed out, waiting, and when Lira finally took it, a small spark passed between their palms, warm and strange, and impossible to ignore. "I'm sorry," Draven said, his voice rougher than usual. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "Neither was I," Lira said quickly, gathering the fallen sheets before he could see her hands shaking. "It won't happen again, Your Majesty." She hoped it wouldn't. She hoped, more than anything, that this was the end of it. It was not the end of it. Over the following days, Draven found more and more reasons to walk through the servants' wing. He suddenly needed his study cleaned every evening instead of every week. He suddenly took the long way to the dining hall, past the laundry room, instead of the short way through the west corridor. His advisors noticed. His mother, the Dowager Queen Celine, noticed most of all. "You are the Alpha King," she reminded him one evening, after catching him staring out the window toward the garden where Lira sometimes swept the stone paths at dusk. "You do not chase servant girls through hallways." "I am not chasing anyone," Draven said, though even he did not fully believe it. Kale believed it completely. The wolf paced restlessly under his skin every time Lira was nearby, and stayed calm and quiet the moment she left the room, as if her presence alone was enough to settle something that had been unsettled for years. Lira noticed the pattern too, and she did everything she could to avoid it. She took on extra chores just to have an excuse to stay in the lower halls. She ate her meals early, before the king usually appeared. She kept her eyes down whenever they passed in a corridor, the way she had trained herself to do for 3 long years. But avoiding a king in his own castle was much harder than avoiding strangers on the street. One evening, Tired from a long day of work, Lira slipped out to the garden after everyone else had gone to sleep. She sat on a cold stone bench beneath a large oak tree, wrapped her arms around her knees, and let herself feel, just for a few minutes, all the things she usually pushed away. The loneliness, the fear, the memory of her parents' faces on the last night she ever saw them. She did not hear him approach. She only felt the bench shift slightly as someone sat down beside her. She looked up, startled, and found Draven sitting there, still dressed in his formal evening clothes, looking as tired as she felt. "You should be sleeping, Your Majesty," she said softly. "So should you," he answered. Neither of them moved to leave. For 11 long minutes, they sat together in silence, close enough that their sleeves brushed against each other, saying nothing at all. Lira did not know why, but for the first time in 3 years, the silence did not feel lonely. It felt safe. She almost let herself relax completely. She almost let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found somewhere she could stay. Then, a few weeks later, everything fell apart in a single moment inside the Great Hall. A visiting lord from a neighboring territory had come to discuss trade agreements with the king. Lira had been asked to serve refreshments, a task she usually handled without any trouble, but as she poured a cup of wine for the visiting lord, he looked up at her face and went very still. "Ashworth," he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, "you have your mother's eyes. You're the trader's daughter." The room went silent in the way rooms go silent, right before something terrible happens. Every noble, every guard, every servant turned to look at Lira, whose hands had started shaking so badly that wine spilled over the edge of the cup. Lira felt the years of hiding crumble around her all at once. She had worked so hard to disappear, and one careless sentence from a stranger had undone all of it in a single breath. She braced herself for what usually came next, shouting, "Guards!" Perhaps worse, she had seen what happened to people whose families were marked as traitors. She did not expect what actually happened. King Draven Ashgrove rose from his seat and crossed the hall in a few long strides, placing himself firmly between Lira and the visiting lord. "The Ashworth case was never properly investigated," Draven said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made even the visiting lord shrink back slightly. "I intend to reopen it personally. If you have further comments about my staff, you may direct them to me." The hall stayed silent, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Shock mostly, mixed with the quiet realization that their king had just spent his authority, in front of everyone, defending a servant girl. Lira stood frozen behind him, still holding the wine jug, feeling something she had not felt in 3 years. She felt seen, and protected, and for once, not alone in facing the world. The weeks that followed moved quickly. Draven kept his word. He assigned his most trusted investigators to reopen her parents' case, and what they found confirmed what Lira had always believed deep down. Her parents had never committed treason. A rival pack, hoping to weaken the Ashworth family's claim to a valuable stretch of northern land, had fabricated the entire charge years earlier. The evidence used against her parents had been planted, and the witnesses had been paid to lie. When the truth came out, the pack elders issued a formal statement clearing her parents' names. It did not bring them back. It did not undo 3 years of hiding and fear. But it gave Lira something she had not had in a very long time: peace. Draven found her again in the garden the evening the news became official. She was sitting on the same stone bench, watching the last light fade behind the trees. "They cleared their names," she said quietly, before he could speak. "After everything, they finally cleared their names." "They should have done it years ago," Draven said, sitting down beside her. "You did it," Lira said, turning to look at him. "You didn't have to. I was just a servant." "You were never just a servant," he said. "Kale knew that the moment he saw you on the floor of that hallway, covered in bedsheets." A small laugh escaped her, the first real laugh she had allowed herself in weeks. "That was a very undignified way to meet a mate." Draven smiled, a rare and genuine smile that softened the tired lines around his eyes. "Would you let him say it properly this time?" Lira's heart pounded, but this time, the fear that usually followed did not come. Instead, she felt something steadier settle in its place, something that felt very much like the beginning of a real home. "Yes," she said simply. Kale's presence rose gently to the surface of Draven's eyes, gold and warm and certain. "Mate," he said, out loud this time, in front of no one but the two of them and the quiet garden. Lira did not run. She did not hide. For the first time in 3 years, she stayed exactly where she was. The servant girl, who had buried her name to survive, became Queen Lira Ashgrove of Blackthorn within the year. The wolf who had recognized her the instant he saw her spent the rest of his reign making sure she never had to feel invisible again. And the king, who had once built walls around his heart, learned that the strongest walls are the ones you choose to open for the right person. Their story spread through the northern territories, not as a tale of thrones and titles, but as a simple truth that many still repeated years later. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who finally stops hiding.